Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now, no spinny thing today, and the reason being, I think the effect of a section like this is going to look a little better without them whizzing around. Mopped up like they're going to appear on the table, these Orc Marauders from Mantic are not looking too bad. What I want to show you today is how you can just smash through armies very quickly. So this is based off a method from an old white dwarf, where one of the heavy metal team decided that they wanted to paint a horde army, like just scores of orc boys. And none of the black was highlighted, it was 3 or 4 colors, just the skin that was highlighted, and it came out looking really cool. A horde army, which looks passable at arm's length, looks astonishing on the table. So that's something I wanted to bring to a more modern sensibility with these new miniatures from the Firefight 2nd Edition starter box from Mantic Games. Now, they very kindly sent me along this box to have a play with. It arrived just after my birthday. Hooray! So I wanted to do something similar to how they appeared on the box. And wouldn't you know it, but it quite closely matches the old white dwarf version. So here we go. All of the paints will be listed in the description below, along with the base recipe. Let's get started. So first of all, I've sprayed all of my orcs with a black primer. I've used the Army Painter's matte black, but it does not matter what you use. By the time we're finished, you're hardly going to see it. And I'm going to say those words, "it doesn't matter," a lot today. We'll start off, first of all then, this is Corvus black. And I'm going to jam this just over the whole miniature. The idea here is that it's going to make things a little more interesting than just flat black. If you do end up with some areas in the recesses that don't have this in there, cool, it's shading. We're really just looking to break up the black, make it a little more interesting to look at. But yeah, for the most part, just jam it on and we're pretty much done. Now, if you're looking to paint these really quickly, you can jam a hairdryer on that for a few seconds. What I have now is flat green from Vallejo. Now, painting orc skin is really a matter of personal preference. What color do you think looks cool? It's up to you. But I tend to find this covers fairly well. I am going to need to apply a second coat. But I like this. It's a little more rich than Warg flesh would be, for example. But don't let me tell you how to paint green skin. If you like one way or the other, just pick a base coat you like and go nuts. So we've got that nice bright look there for the skin. I'm going to flip them around. And here I have Vallejo's Flat Brown to do in the leather details. Now this is nice and quick. Again, I've picked flat brown rather, because it covers so well. You'll see one coat, it just jams straight on. Now it is at this stage of the painting that it becomes clear these kits, with all due respect to Mantic, they aren't really the equal of Games Workshop's kits in that respect. Some of the detail does blur a little, particularly on the legs. Like you'll see, you kind of have to interpret by looking at the other leg which part are leather straps and so forth. But then you recall that these, in euros at least, are literally half the price of a box of Orc Boys for the same number of miniatures. So, yeah, I'm suddenly not too upset by that. I think from the perspective of building an army as well, there's an interesting perspective of, do I need every miniature to be perfect, or once it's got a lick of paint on and it looks okay, am I painting an army rather than a bunch of display pieces? So it's up to your personal flavor, what you like the look of. I know some folks don't like that blurring, and honestly, I can see perfectly well why. It's quite prominent in some areas, and it's really kind of a bummer because I do really like the design of the Marauders. But once you've got your eye in and you are just painting some of that detail back on, essentially, it doesn't look too bad. So all of the leather bits, and there's normally quite a few, so your straps, your webbing, and parts around the legs, one coat of flat brown, and then we'll move on. As well as the parts that are very clearly defined, I've used that brown to add a strap here or there. I think that's going to look a little bit better. Now, I've got Gunmetal from the Army Painter, and mostly here I'm looking for the coverage that it offers. With medium base brush, you can just jam that straight in there and, oh, Job is a good one. We don't have to mess around with 2 or 3 coats of this. It is good to go. Now, having just had a grizzle about the kits, something that I do like about the Marauders here is that all of the options are represented in a box. So if you want to assemble 10 guys who've all got close combat weapons, you can do that. Or if you want to assemble them all with ranged weapons and a heavy machine gun and that sort of stuff, you can do that too. It does take a little bit of work. There we go. I think that looks like the edge of the boot plate. Most of these areas I'm going to hit with the big brush. And then any little details like some of the grenades on his chest, I'm going to swap on down to a smaller brush to paint those in. I just realized I've missed a bit with that metal, but not to worry. I have some Rakarth flesh and I'm going to paint in his teeth. I'm just going to block in the entire area because once we shade it, it's going to be a little better looking. Once you finish that, if you do have any big splodges of color in the wrong spot, so I had a big bit of metal on this guy's chin, for example, just do a little bit of tidy up. Don't worry too much if you've got little flicks of color in the wrong spot, because we're painting for large mobs. You're not going to see them. So I've shaken up some Agrax Earthshade, and we are going to go to town on this guy. Make sure you've got your brush really loaded up, and we're just straight over the top. Really work it in, and you can be as generous with this as you like. You cannot get this wrong. So I'm going to bucket this over everything, and you'll see straight away a little bit of variation in color in our black. But yeah, this does not take long to do at all. Just while I'm doing this, I do feel as though poor Mantic, most folks are sort of using their miniatures as stand-ins for 40k stuff, which of course, I would imagine there's a little bit of them trading on that. But I'm actually really excited to give Firefight a try. I was reading the rulebook, and it looks like a lot of fun. In particular, the way units move very similarly to how in Legion, you just move a leader of a unit and then mob up everybody around him. You don't have to individually measure everything. Oh, goodness. For big mobs like these orcs, that's going to be awesome. But yeah, that's our Agrax Earthshade done. Let's pop this guy in the sun for about half an hour. And then you'll have something which looks a little more reasonable. The green in particular starts looking a lot more like orc skin. And we've got a little bit of definition between the light and dark areas on our clothing. So I think that first overbrush of a dark grey is going to be really useful. Speaking of the grey though, I've got one of my little cheap nasty brushes and some Dawnstone dry paint. What I'm going to do is just lightly flick along the edges and dry brush up some of the black. Reason being, I think this can be a little more interesting than it looks. And just by concentrating towards some of the edges, a little variation in color there is going to help quite a bit. After a couple of passes to build up some of that grey, you're going to get a little bit more variation in your shading there, which I think adds quite a bit. But on the subject of the brown bits, if you're worried about hitting them, I've got now some Golgfag Brown and another dry brush. And quite lightly and carefully, I'm just going to pick along some of the edges of detail. So some points, of course, we had to paint that brown line on. I'll just avoid those so I don't end up making a big mess of them. But in other areas, you'll see it very quickly adds a fair bit of warmth to the miniature, which is otherwise lacking. So don't worry too much if it does look at first like you're going a little overboard with this. Just keep your brush moving in the same direction and brighten up that brown. Now if you're not too confident about getting that where you want it to go, what you could use here instead would be some Skrag Brown. Highlight those straps traditionally, and then you don't have to worry about getting any of the brown on your black bits, but I don't think it matters. For Skrag Brown, though, we have got another use. So whether you're planning on highlighting with it or not, I've watered it down here until it resembles one of my shades, and I'm going to just paint it into a few of the recesses on my gun, on the metal bits, basically any of the metal bits, honestly. Just a little bit of this. If I get it in the shot, goodness me. You can chuck it into the recesses, and where it collects a little too much on the high points, just smudge it with your thumb and have another go. Now the thing that I like about that weathering technique is that it's super simple and you cannot put it in the wrong place. It's just a bunch of grime, you let it collect where it will, and you can smear it around if you want a more natural look. It's super easy. The last thing we're going to do is to highlight his skin. Now for this I am going to use Warboss skin, or Warboss flesh I think it's called. All I'm going to do is just blop this fairly roughly onto most of the prominent parts of the orc's skin. So, big corded muscles in his arm here, backs of his fingers, and this will go on quite light, so it's going to look pretty rubbish at first, but as it dries and when you put it out to table distance, it will look much better. So try not to get hung up on doing this section correctly, as it were. Just a couple of bits here and there to accentuate the high points of musculature, and you're golden. Now once I'm finished with this, what I'm going to do is pop a varnish on him. I'm going to use Vallejo's matte varnish for that, take him outside and spray him, and then go ahead and pop a base on him and his mates. So let's get a look at what this guy looks like when him and all of his chums are done. And so there at last, with his mates, is our Orc Marauder. So I think here you get an idea of how they look a little bit different when they're all ranked up. When there's a bunch of them on the table, suddenly the fact that individually they aren't gorgeous kind of disappears. Now, could you paint them more nicely? Yes, certainly. And I think you get a really nice result out of doing things that way. But this squad took me less than an hour. So if you are looking to just smash out large armies of fairly basic looking troops, I don't know, I think you could do worse than this. This is all right. And that's a philosophy I think we step away from sometimes when we're concentrating on painting. If you're painting for an army, how does the army look? And if the answer is yeah, all right, probably not doing too bad. So again, thank you to Mantic for sending these along for me to have a play with, and hopefully it doesn't come across as though I was being overly brutal on these miniatures. I do like them, there are one or two minor bugbears, but they're cool, and when they say good value, yeah, I would agree with that. Thank you as well to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of the patrons who keep me ticking in paints and glue, including my wonderful producers. Alan Nuttall, Kyrie Crawford, Trainboy, Jimmy, and Rod. Your support makes this possible. Any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comments box below. My Instagram and Twitter are both linked there too. So, thank you very much for your time on it all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.